Agriculture has long been a source of tension between the U.S. and Canada, particularly in dairy trade. The head of USDA expects dairy will make it into next week's round of negotiations, but says talks will be difficult. Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue says farmers are anxious about NAFTA talks, and while he thinks he's effectively made the point about doing no harm, there's a lot left to be seen.
Trade is bilateral. Negotiations are bilateral. We can't just insist on our provisions in there. It's bilateral. So there is some anxiety as to be expected until these are concluded.
Dairy farmers feel the anxiety. Canada implemented a new pricing system for dairy this year, resulting in a steep drop of imports of U.S. milk.
On my farm back home, we live in New York, and so up until recently there was a fair amount of dairy products exported to Canada. But with the recent passage of some laws in Canada, we've lost that market, and it's really hurt us back home.
1 out of 7 gallons of milk produced in the United States gets exported, and that's why Hardy says trade negotiations are critical.
The U.S. dairy industry was very happy when President Trump said he would make this a high priority in the NAFTA trade negotiations. So I'm excited as a dairy farmer to have our president understand how important it is to the U.S. dairy industry that we straighten out this trade issue with Canada, because Canada was either the first or the second largest country we exported to.
Canada is adamant that overproduction is the cause of U.S. dairy farmers' pain, but it's not surprised the U.S. wants it to drop its dairy supply management system.
Whenever Canada enters any sort of trade discussions, supply management always comes up. But I can tell you, for no matter if it's a left or a right government in Canada, supply management has always been a sacred cow.
Canada made concessions in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but says it's unwilling to include those same changes in NAFTA. Meanwhile, U.S. wheat farmers want the Trump administration to stop renegotiating current trade deals and strike new ones. The National Association of Wheat Growers and the U.S. Wheat Associates sent a letter pushing for a broader global market for wheat. They say U.S. wheat has struggled to find international buyers as other countries, like Russia, peddle cheaper grains. The groups asked President Trump to make good on repeated campaign trail promises of new bilateral trade agreements. The nominee for Chief Agricultural Negotiator echoes the wheat industry sentiment. Senate Ag Committee Chairman Pat Roberts introduced fellow Kansan Greg Dowd at his confirmation hearing earlier this week. Dowd pledged to not go backwards in NAFTA negotiations and says the U.S. needs to aggressively pursue new trade agreements with Asia. Well, several rural communities lack high-speed internet access, and it's a popular issue in Washington. FCC Chairman Ajit Pai says he's one of the many working to make it better. RFD-TV's Sarah Mock sat down with the commissioner in Washington.
The distance between communities who have access to reliable high-speed internet and those who don't can be vast. And bridging that divide has been a goal for FCC Chairman Ajit Pai since day one.
Our top goal should be to bridge that divide, to make sure that every American, especially in rural areas, has the chance to partake of the digital revolution. Some 28% of rural Americans, for instance, can't get a very high-speed internet access, and in some parts of the country you can't get wireless access at all. We want to be able to change that, and that's why, in a bipartisan way over the last several months, we've pushed across the finish line some really interesting programs that I hope will be able to change the equation, to get 4G LTE to every part of America, to get fixed broadband into more of America, to allow wireless and satellite and other companies to finally have a chance to compete in rural America.
Pai says the first priority for addressing access is increasing funds available to companies looking to serve rural areas.
So the FCC has under its administration what's known as the Universal Service Fund. If you look on your phone bill, you see a line item that says Universal Service Fee or something like that. That money goes into a pot, and the pot is administered by the FCC. Now, historically, the FCC had distributed a lot of those subsidies to parts of the country that already had service. It occurred to me that, well, if instead of subsidizing an additional competitor in an area, let's try to bring some of that subsidy to an unserved part of the country, parts of America that don't have any access at all. That is the core of the digital divide. And so so in a bipartisan way, in February, we announced a $4.5 billion plan over the next decade to bring 4G LTE, a high-speed wireless service, to unserved parts of America.
The FCC is also moving forward with a plan to bring $2 billion worth of fixed broadband to rural communities.
We're doing it in a fiscally responsible way, I should add. What we wanted to do is have accountability. So we have very specific benchmarks. By the end of 2017, 2018, 2019, you have to build out a certain percentage of your service territory. You also have to report back to the FCC consistently and show your work, so to speak. And at the end of the process, if you haven't used those subsidies wisely, then we have an accelerated payback schedule so that we want American taxpayers to know every single dollar that is being spent on your behalf is being spent wisely to connect you with digital opportunity.
Chairman Pai has continued to be active in rural access discussions across the federal government, including as part of Secretary Sonny Perdue's Task Force for Agriculture and Rural Prosperity. For RFD-TV, I'm Sarah Mock in Washington.
Well, the FCC is currently seeking public comment on a number of initiatives related to the chairman's goal of closing that digital divide. You can learn more and submit your own comments by going online to fcc.gov.